Welcome to Magnificat TV News, dedicated to offering the news of the Church. Today is Wednesday, October 13, 2021, and these are our headlines. The Pope inaugurated the Synod on Synodality, which will conclude in 2023. He warned that the Synod is not a parliament and that it is not based on service. The German bishops have decided to extend their synod for at least 2 more years. It began in 2019 and it was due to end in this October. A devastating report on pederasty caused by clerics in French has been published. Some voices have criticized the report as not very scientific. The trial against Cardinal Becciu has been delayed, as the judge was unable to get the prosecution to present evidence against the accused. The killing of Christians in Nigeria continues. A bishop has denounced the situation and described it as a slow genocide. The Synod, it is not a parliament, nor is its fate based on polls, the Pope has said as he opened the Synod on Synodality.
Pope Francis on Saturday addressed participants in the Synod on Synodality, which the Pontiff himself opened on Sunday with a Mass. In his address, he recalled that the Synod is not a parliament. It is not a sounding out of opinions. The Synod is an ecclesial movement, and the protagonist of the Synod is the Holy Spirit. We're called to unity, to communion, to the fraternity that is born of feeling embraced by divine love, which is unique. He continued before pointing out that the key words of the Synod are 3: communion, participation, and mission. Regarding participation, he pointed out its importance for the success of the process, because synods, in order to be fruitful, must be well prepared, promoting the real involvement of each and everyone, because participation is a requirement of the baptismal faith.
The German Synod will last at least 2 more years. It has already been going on for 2 years, but it seems a short time, and they have decided that they need more time to know where the Church is going.
The synodal way will be extended again. This was announced by the president of the German Bishops' Conference, Bishop Becciu, and the president of the Central Committee of German Catholics, Thomas Sternberg, at the end of the second session of the Synodal Assembly held in Frankfurt, which ended on Saturday. The synodal path, which began on December 1st, 2019, with the lighting of the synodal candle, and had already been extended once because of COVID-19, will thus be extended to a total duration of more than 4 years. On Saturday afternoon, deliberations had to be interrupted around 3:15 p.m. because there was no longer a quorum. 5 were short of the required 2/3 majority of the 154 participants. Bishop Franz Joseph Bod told the press conference that he considered it a great moment that the basic text of the Synodal Forum, which wants to change the Church's sexual morality, was accepted. The most contentious issues of the discussions at this session of the Synodal Assembly was the debate on the abolition of the priesthood, which would have caused a heated controversy. The Church's understanding of the sacrament of marriage must also change radically, according to most of the participants.
The French Church is in shock after the release of a report on the involvement of priests in cases of pederasty, although The report has drawn criticism.
The Independent Commission on Sexual Abuse in the Church delivered the conclusion of its report on sexual abuse committed by priests and religious on minors and vulnerable adults since the 1950s. The commission is chaired by Jean-Marc Sauvé, Vice President of the French Council of State. Sauvé, when asked about the number of predators, said that it corresponds only to men, although religious women have also committed acts of violence. The number of victims per male aggressor would amount to 63 according to Sauvé's calculations. There would be slightly more than 3,000 pedophile priests in those 70 years out of a total of 115,000 who have lived in France in that time. The number of victims amounts to 216,000, although this is not a real figure, but an estimate based on the cases that have been analyzed. Of all the victims of abuse in France, 5.5 million, 96% were committed in civil society within the family, schools, high schools, camps, and 4% in the ecclesial environment. The estimate of victims is based on a survey of 28,000 victims, whose aggressors are not only from the church, but from society in general. In reality, the number of interviews conducted with possible victims of ecclesiastics was 243. The number of complaints received over the internet during 3 years was 6,800, with no investigation into their authenticity. Most of the sexual violence, 56%, took place between the 1960s and 1969. It then dropped sharply in the 1970s and 1990s and has remained steady since 1990. According to the report, clergy abuse massively affects boys, 80% of the victims, with a very high concentration between 10 and 13 years of age. The proportion of girls is 20% and more distributed by age group. In the rest of society, 75% of abuse affects girls and 80% of domestic violence.
The trial against Cardinal Becciu and others accused of embezzlement has been postponed as defense lawyers were unable to access evidence.
The Vatican Tribunal trying Italian Cardinal Angelo Becciu and 9 others for financial irregularities in the accounts of the Holy See decided to adjourn the trial until November 17 to allow the defense access to evidence. The judge ordered the partial return to the prosecutor's office of the documents relating to only some of the defendants so that they can be reanalyzed and the missing ones deposited before November 3rd, including the video recordings of the key witness, Monsignor Perlasca, who obtained immunity by accusing the cardinal. Cardinal Becciu's lawyer welcomed the decision. The prosecutor has taken a step back by admitting that he had not conducted the interrogations, which are necessary as they are vital to avoid a trial, the lawyer said as he left the hearing. During today's hearing, the defense attorneys complained that the prosecution did not provide them with all the evidence, such as Perlasca's testimony, while the prosecution responded by saying that it had to protect privacy and also alleged the difficulty of obtaining copies of all the computer material. The case attempts to clarify the responsibilities of the sale and purchase of a property in central London that ended in a swindle and cost the coffers of the Secretariat of State of the Holy See an estimated 175 million euros.
The Muslims continue to kill Christians in Nigeria with impunity. A bishop has described that what is happening is a slow genocide.
The Catholic Church in Nigeria says Christians in their country are victims of a process of ethnic and religious cleansing at the hands of Fulani Muslims, with the complicity of the state, which is not just due to clashes over land between Muslim herdsmen and Christian farmers. This is not just about grazing issues. For me, this is a religious war, says the Bishop of the Diocese of Makurdi in Benue State, Bishop Wilfred Anagbe, who has described what is happening as a slow genocide. They have an agenda, which is the Islamization of this country, and they are doing it carefully, eliminating all Christians and occupying their territories. If it's about pastoralism, why kill people and why burn their houses? He asks. Bishop Wilfred Anagbe emphasizes that the armed forces are under the direct control of the president, and moreover, all the military chiefs of the Navy, the Air Force, and the police are Muslims. After so many years of violence, not a single Fulani has been brought to trial. According to official figures, there are some 3,000 dead from this wave of violence in recent years, but those on the ground say the figure could be as high as 36,000, with many more people displaced, homeless, and deeply traumatized by their experiences.
Our editorial this week is dedicated to commenting on the report on pederasty in French and the extension of the German Synod.
This week's breaking news, terrible news, was the publication of a report on pederasty committed by religious priests and also by lay people linked to the church in France. The data are shocking. They speak of 216,000 victims, an appalling figure. There is talk of more than 3,000 priests and religious involved. It is true that in the framework of 70 years, but still an appalling figure. However, first of all, we should not minimize the situation. The issue is very serious, but we must also look at these data with caution. For example, only 243 personal interviews have been made. No more than 3,000 emails of complaints have been received. We're not, therefore, in front of proven cases before justice. We are in front of some cases, probably many of which are true. Just one would be very serious, and there are more than one, but they are cases that have served those who have made the report to extrapolate these data to 70 years and say that approximately, because they themselves say that there is a margin of error of 50,000 no less, that approximately in 70 years, with 110,000 priests who lived in France at that time, approximately 216,000 victims have suffered pederasty at the hands of priests and religious. We should not minimize the situation, but we must be very prudent. These are not proven cases. There have been, it seems, about 6,000 reports, which does not mean that there have been 6,000 convictions, 2,000, almost 3,000 emails. The report through an email can be considered as a true fact. 243 victims or probable or possible victims interviewed. An extrapolation have been made that gives a gigantic figure that is almost certainly greatly exaggerated. We must be very careful, lest by accepting these figures we are given rise to accusations that are not true. that there has been pederasty for sure. That a single case is serious, of course, but 2016,000 and nobody has found out about it in 70 years. Another thing they tiptoe over is the fact that there have been 5.5 million cases of pederasty in France at that time, which means that the Church would be liable for, if that is true, and I am sure that this figure is not authentic, because if it is true, she would be liable for 4%. But no one talks about the remaining 96% of victims, only about what the Church has hypothetically done. Two other things that are hardly mentioned, but which appear in the report, is that most of these cases, alleged cases, took place after the Second Vatican Council. There is an increase in the curve of the incidence of abuse, which then falls and decreases. Is the abuse of minors related to the way in which the Second Vatican Council was applied in France and elsewhere? Why don't you go deeper into this? Because perhaps there is a relationship to the extent that there was a lack of control and self-control, that is to say, to the extent that it was thought that everything was valid and that sexual norms were no longer important, because in some, I do not know if in many, the demons that were inside came out to do misdeeds. Another fact that is also overlooked is that more than 80% of these alleged victims are boys or male adolescents, which does not coincide with the percentage in civil society. This indicates that there is a serious problem of homosexuality in the clergy, but they do not want to touch it. We cannot say that a homosexual for being homosexual is a pederast at all. Just as you cannot say that a heterosexual for being heterosexual is a pederast, but that is a fact to be taken into account. Let us be very prudent, because otherwise we can play into the hands of those who elaborate reports without a scientific basis in order to harm the Church, which is already sufficiently beaten by itself. So with this, it is not surprising that the figure of the priest is totally discredited, and that what happened in Ireland happened. This year, in all the dioceses of Ireland, including Northern Ireland, only 4 young men entered the seminary in the whole country. Ireland, one of the great Catholic nations of Europe and the world, this year has only 4 seminarians for all the dioceses of the country. It is a tragedy, and those who do not realize what is happening and what is going to happen is because they do not want to see it. Another point of attention this week was once again Germany. It is like the lightning that does not cease, Germany, but this time in a different form. The organizing council of their synodal path has met, and as they did not have a quorum, that is to say that not even among themselves they do not have enough interest to go to the meetings, and now there is no longer the excuse of the epidemic. They had to cancel the meeting, and the only thing they did was to say that with 2 years that they have been deliberating and dizzying the partridge, well, that is not enough time, and that they need until 2023 2 more years, and they say that at least they will have us 4 years with periodic assemblies to discuss things that cannot be approved. I get the impression that they know that Pope Francis is not going to accept the conclusions of the Synod, and that they have decided to postpone those conclusions for at least 2 more years. They say that at least until 2023 to see if a new Pope comes, they think, more in line with their liberal Protestant positions. At the moment in this assembly, they were reflecting on the role of the laity as priests based on the common priesthood of the faithful, also called real priesthood, linked to the sacrament of baptism, because they know they have no priest, but if they have no priest and people do not go to Mass, and religious practice has fallen brutally in Germany, will more priests go because they see a distinguished lady dressed as if she were a priest doing a parody of Mass on an altar? Anyway, let's see what happens. They give us 2 more years of having us periodically arguing about the pilgrim things they come up with. Another fact has been the trials in the Vatican. There have been 2. Well, there has been a sentence and a trial attempt. The most striking is the one involving Cardinal Becciu and other former members involved in the Vatican economy. There are some accusations against them, of course, especially against the Cardinal, accusations that the defense has asked for evidence, because the evidence is a conversation with a repentant who was the Cardinal's secretary. Well, the defense has asked for the evidence to be presented. The President agreed with the defense and said that the evidence should be provided, and the prosecution refused to provide the evidence. This week, when the hearing took place, there was a big scandal, a loud scandal, and in the end, the President had to dissolve the hearing, dissolve the appointment, and postpone it for another month until November, and demand that the prosecution, that is to say, the accusation, to present the evidence. How is there going to be a trial if not even the defense has the evidence in hand of what they are accusing their defendants of? For now, the trial is postponed, but whether or not there is a sentence, even if there is a trial or not, remains to be seen. What has happened is that there has been a sentence. It was news that among the altar boys who assist in the Basilica of St. Peter in the Vatican, there had been sexual abuse or sexual relations to priests, and some seminarians were involved. This week the sentence has been known, and it turns out that they are innocent. They are innocent. That is what the sentence said. They are innocent, that there was no sexual abuse. This was a very mediatic case. Shouldn't this case serve as an example before the accusations that are being launched in France and in other countries? Unfortunately, there are many things that have happened, but maybe they are using us as a scapegoat to cover up what is happening in other areas. In France, 96% of the abuses had nothing to do with the church, or they are using all that, magnifying it, to hurt a church that they already see in its low hours, or perhaps in the lowest hours of recent times. Prudence and trust in God. See you next week, God willing.
If you wish to keep up to date to what is happening in the church, you can follow us on our website, www.magnificat.tv. See you next week, God willing.